Everyone, and welcome back. This is the last session before lunch, and it's going to be a bit of a treat. So this session on the main stage is Equitable and Accessible AI. Our moderator is going to be Yuda Veranos, sorry. Thank you. Our speakers will be Jamie Boyd from Deloitte Canada and Anna Baird from Google, who are here in person. And online, we will have Tony Labellois from Statistics Canada and Benoit Tehaï from Treasury Board of Canada. This session is going to provide tangible steps and considerations when designing equitable systems and policies in the age of AI. So this is going to be really practical and allow you to experience or understand what we need to think about as we're building our frameworks around this. So that's in the main stage. Before I hand the mic over, in the breakout rooms, we have Exploring BC results from the Canadian Community Health Survey data using custom Power BI report by the Government of British Columbia. We have Beyond Planes, Trains, Automobiles, open mobility data in the City of Edmonton by the City of Edmonton. In breakout 2, there is a workshop for open data for equitable policing, transforming how police services approach data by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I'm actually really looking forward to the main stage presentation, though the other ones look quite interesting as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Yuda.
Thank you, and it's quite a pleasure to be here in Victoria, as I just came off an open adaptive policy conference, and I would suggest that the content that is here be shared with them and they share their content with you. But the topic we want to look at is equitable and accessible AI. And when you think about equitable and accessible AI, it's a bit of an oxymoron, because AI is designed to discriminate more consistently, effectively, and accurately. And with respect to accessibility, even the inventors of AI are having difficulty accessing it, controlling it, and understanding it. And then when we think about the people that feel the most discriminatory impacts of AI, how do we achieve equity for the people at the margins of the normal distribution? The hugely diverse outliers, the people that don't fit into any tidy protected identity cluster. If you are different, you will be filtered out from employment, academic opportunities, denied loans, or flagged as an anomaly and a security threat. And this pattern is self-perpetuating. So I think the notion of equitable and accessible AI to some extent is a fairly wicked problem. And as data gets more granular and nuanced, there are more ways to be different. AI creates a future modeled on the successes of the past, which brings along discrimination of the past. And we've heard a lot lately in many different venues about AI equity and even the emergence of an AI equity industry. But AI harm is more than human bias being codified in algorithms. It's more than spurious proxies to replace missing data. It's more than bias labels in categorizing data. And it is far more than lack of proportional representation in data, so data deserts. Even if by some miracle we achieve full proportional representation, the data of the majority will outweigh and obscure the needs of the minority if we stick to statistical reasoning. And of course, all of our data methods at the moment rely on statistical reasoning. AI is simply automating, accelerating, and amplifying our past practices more consistently. And unfortunately, even our AI ethics efforts are using some of the same processes. So we've gathered an amazing set of individuals who work in data and have attempted to tackle this particular wicked problem. And I want to turn first to Anna. Can you tell us how you have addressed this particular challenge that we're facing? How do you encourage equitable and accessible AI within the company?
So it's very nice to be here. I agree with you. It's a nice Friday and it's sunny in Victoria for those that get to be in the room. I think I'll start with the perspective that in the work that we do at Google, a lot of the filtering that we do is all about the focus on the community around us, our users, consumers, and customers. And I think to our credit, in the last 2.5 decades, we just turned 25 this year. We had a birthday celebration for Google a couple months ago. In the 2.5 decades, I think we've been very strong at looking intersectionality that is reflected in data. So I think one of the pieces that I find most optimistic about how we look at artificial intelligence, building of models, the way in which we invite perspective, both from who's actually building the model and also who's testing the model and that feedback loop. I think we've been fairly good and inclusive in how we look at those teams. I think the interesting piece that comes to mind for us, which is a huge challenge, is just the pace at which we're developing models, exploring proof of concepts, finding opportunities to use AI in everyday life for all of you. And so one example would be the fact that there are 7,000 languages plus spoken globally. And one of our big focal points has been to get 1,000 of those languages embedded in our AI capabilities, especially when it comes to translations and things like that. So that's 1 in 7, right? Like when you look at that, that's something we're working towards and we're very proud of, but it's not quite good enough because it's definitely not 7,000. So I think for us, we have challenges like that. I think the second thing I would say, and I'm sure Jamie has some interesting perspective, is we realize that there are aspects that we are trying to further, like in the medical field, in the field of sustainability, where we have very clear outcomes that we're trying to drive as a business. And in driving towards those outcomes, so AlphaFold as an example, like 400 million proteins can be looked at in 3D imagery, which saves us like 200 million years of research. But in looking at all of that data and looking at how we're modeling it, we haven't necessarily considered all of the intersectionality of how that data was collected and how it's being used in the model. So there's a lot of room for us to continue to do better. But I think for us, it comes back to our set of principles and how we're trying to create opportunity for learning within Google's 185,000 plus full-time employees, and making sure that the ethics of AI is constantly embedded in how we're thinking about our everyday motions.
And Jamie, you probably have much to add to that.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me here. It's can you hear me okay? Yeah. It's just such a pleasure to be here and see so many familiar faces and see everybody's ongoing commitment to the open data movement, if we can call it that, within Canada. It just fills my heart with joy to see so many returning people and new faces also. Within the firm that I work with, we do spend quite a bit of time working with AI. And I think my perspective for AI and equity and accessibility is really threefold. The first is the tools are so cool. Really, like our ability to do things at pace has never been greater. We spend a lot of time doing human-centered design. When we build services with public sector clients, we have a strong bias towards being agile, towards starting with the user. This is a bias that we are proud to carry. But it's also expensive to do these things. It's time-consuming. And our ability to go and do those really deep qualitative data collection exercises and gather insights from those exercises, it has never been greater. We've got an experiment, we've built an internal tool, a Gen AI-based tool, to help us synthesize some of our qualitative research. And in some cases, we've got one little project where it created efficiencies of about 60% in our ability to synthesize complex qualitative data. So the technology is just so exciting. Second observation, however, is that our understanding of digital equity in this country is quite poor. We went and did some work over the last year or so to try to understand what does digital equity look and feel like in Canada, and the gaps are far deeper, far more entrenched, far more pernicious than we ever would have imagined. So often we start having these conversations and it quickly turns into a bandwidth conversation. Do you have fast internet? It ends up we're not that bad in Canada. We've had a lot of progress in the last 5 or so years around upload and download speeds. Most of Canada meets CRTC minimum speeds. What we find, however, is that the ability to access digital experiences, because you have the skills, because you have modern devices, those are really quite limited. There are all sorts of racial dynamics. Underserved communities are not able to participate in the same way. On average, across Canada, we have 1 device per person. If you go into low-income families, it drops down to 0.7 devices per person. Right? And so that means that mom and dad are sharing their devices with the kid who's trying to do homework at night, right? And so there are real access issues, and there's a real ecosystem issue. Less than half of Canadians, I believe it's 44% of Canadians, trust the public sector to effectively manage their data, right? And that's based on primary research that we conducted. That's not great. And so when you're not trusting your digital experiences, how excited are you going to be to participate fully? So I think that we've started saying, yes, the tools are really cool. Our understanding of digital equity is not great and desperately needs to improve. And across the board, these sort of shifting understandings of both equity and the art of the possible when it comes to AI affects all of our service propositions. Right? We can get into this a little bit further, but generally when we build new services, we think, do people want it? Can we do it? Can it be sustainable? And the risk calculation associated with each of those parameters of whether or not we build a new digital service has shifted dramatically with the advent of Gen AI and AI more generally.
And if I can just add a question to that, I mean, you've alluded to the data impasse, the individuals that are most vulnerable to data abuse and misuse are also the people that likely are within that gap and that require equity the most. One of the areas that we've discussed here quite a bit is data privacy. But one of the insights that we've gained in terms of individuals, say, who have disabilities, is that they've already bartered their privacy for essential services. And the data protections that we have really don't work. If you're hugely unique, you can be re-identified. If you're the only person in a neighborhood that is black, say, then you'll be re-identified. If you're the only person with a colostomy bag that is being ordered on Amazon, you'll be re-identified. And the differential privacy doesn't work either because it removes the data that... So how do you address the data impasse that is part of that equity issue that you're discussing?
If you figure that one out, you've got my vote for Prime Minister. But no, not just to pile on, the organizations that exist to protect these kinds of rights are often not particularly well equipped to do that advocacy. We've got another report that came out last week that looks at digital equity for organizations across Canada. Larger organizations like a Deloitte, like a Google, we're quite capable. We get all sorts of cool tools. We experiment with them. We play with them, all that. But 2/3 of Canada's labor force works in small organizations. Right? 99.8% of our businesses are small businesses. We're talking plumbers and childcare providers, and those folks really do not have digital skills. They can do basic things, send and receive messages. As soon as you get to intermediate skills, like altering content online, things that everybody in this room can very easily do, most Canadians do not have a clue how to start, right? And so having these more sophisticated conversations that could inform advocacy become really problematic, and it's only going to get worse. We rank 25th out of 29 OECD countries for investments in on-the-job digital skills development. We are so wildly underinvesting in building digital capacity that's fit for purpose.
Right. And we have with us Tony from Stats Canada, but only on audio. And these are some of the challenges. I mean, certainly data, statistics, statistical reasoning, the use of statistical tools to analyze and make decisions with data are part of your wheelhouse. Can you tell us how you are addressing the issues of equity and accessibility?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Despite all the technical difficulties and the computer that wants to restart, I'm glad to be here. I'm in Ottawa-Gatineau on the traditional Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, where I have the chance to play, work, and live. And I'm just back from Geneva after a long trip yesterday, so I'm still thrilled to be here. And thank you for the invitation. Statistics Canada really cares about making sure that there is more and more disaggregated data available. Where we've launched a plan for more and more disaggregated data in StatScan surveys and other statistical services in 2021 with an investment of the government. Notably for women, for Indigenous people, persons with disability, and for racialized groups. And we think that it's very important that those data sources are used as a good portion for training the models and for making sure we feed the right data in those models, so that we are hopeful that the AI models will give us eventually the right conclusions. That's actually a challenge to identify the sources of bias, but we need to be very vigilant for that. And we need to quantify it and apply the corrections as much as possible. It's all about data quality and having sufficient input. If we don't have the right data quality, or we think we have insufficient data input, we have to be very cautious with the conclusions that will be provided by AI. We have simple examples in StatScan, even in our processes, where, for example, if we train an algorithm with web scraping only in English or mostly in English, suddenly the for coding, the coding for other languages, including French, will likely not necessarily be accurate. And that's a simple example to illustrate, but that's getting even more complicated when we're trying to do something that has even more impact on the different segments of the Canadian population.
Thank you. And Benoit, you've been in charge of data, ethical data within Canada for some time, and you have created a number of instruments and tools to ensure ethics, or to protect and safeguard against AI bias and unethical use of AI. Can you tell us a little bit about the strategies you've considered, and perhaps some that you are foreseeing in the future?
Of course. Well, thank you. And it's great to be here and to be participating in this. And it's a complex problem, right? So there won't be a single solution. There's no silver bullet for this. It really needs to be a combination of things that will make the overall approach effective. And in the federal government, the prime policy that we have around this is the Directive on Automated Decision-Making. And through its various requirements, it tries to address some of these problems. It starts with really robust quality assurance, testing the data and the models before production, for things like bias and undesired outcomes, but also after these systems are launched, continuously monitoring the outcomes on a regular basis to see if it's behaving as we are expecting it, if it's affecting everybody equally. these are data-driven systems, so we need to make sure that the data quality is really high, and the directive stresses that data needs to be relevant, accurate, and up-to-date. These are requirements from the Privacy Act. Whenever we make decisions that impact people, we need to ensure these things, but data quality goes beyond that, as we've discussed. And Jamie also spoke about qualitative data. So, the measures I've just mentioned, testing for data and testing the model, data quality, these are technical measures in a sense and quantitative measures. But Jamie spoke to qualitative data. We also need qualitative assessments when we consider these systems. And there's a few of those in the directive. Judah, you've explained why statistical methods are not sufficient. So that just further reinforces the need also for some qualitative methods. And so for us, a few of these are the GBA plus framework, and Anna mentioned intersectionality. That's exactly what this is. So GBA plus stands for gender-based analysis, but the plus is really important. It looks at gender impacts, yes, but the plus brings in that intersectionality. When we look at gender impacts, we need to look at them in combination with other factors like age, like culture, ethnicity, race, language, the location. Canada's a vast place. Income of people, mental or physical disability. I'm probably forgetting a bunch that are part of this framework, but that's part of the study we need to look at is considering the people impacted and those factors, how will they see different realities or different outcomes based on this? And we also want our approach to be informed by the expertise of other experts. So we require a peer review where an external expert will come and advise on the risks to these decisions that we're making and how these risks were managed. Another aspect is the algorithmic impact assessment, which is another tool that we've developed to help us understand the potential negative impacts and how these impacts can be minimized. It asks things, for example, are we targeting vulnerable population, or is it non-vulnerable populations that are primarily affected? It invites us to think about impacts on different people. For example, are there impacts on people with disability that could be affected by the system? And when we consider these impacts, how long do they last? How significant are the impacts? Can they be reversed? And so on and so forth. So there's really a wide set of measures as part of this. And the final one I would mention is also transparency, which is really critical in this, to share information with the population about where and how we use these data-driven technologies. That gives us an opportunity for dialogue. It creates accountability. For example, the algorithmic impact assessment that I've mentioned, we ask that that be published. So if we've gotten it wrong, people will let us know, will call us up on it, and that's important. It creates accountability. We talk about open data, open information, like publishing the results of these assessments is an important mechanism in all this.
And I'm going to ask you a few more questions about these tools.
Yes.
Many of the tools that exist to determine whether or not decisions, for example, should be used, whether we can use automated decisions in our refugee systems, our CRA, et cetera, all of the services within governments are conducting an assessment that is either an impact assessment or a risk assessment, where we try to balance the risks with the benefits. But the issue there for someone that tends to be an outlier or a tiny minority is that even in that risk assessment or impact assessment, it's implementing statistical reasoning. And therefore, in a risk-benefit analysis, the benefits to the majority will outweigh the fairly critical risks to the few. In an impact assessment, many of the cumulative harms that are experienced by people who are in the minority will be seen as low impact and therefore will be deemed not to require any protections. How can we create tools that recognize those fairly critical things that are seen as anecdotal from a statistical perspective, but in fact, for any one person that is experiencing them, are hugely critical and life-changing.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. And there's a number of elements to this, I think. And to my earlier point, it's not a single solution to these complex questions. But I've mentioned the importance of mixing the quantitative methods, so the statistical impact analysis that takes place, with some qualitative ones that tries to consider all the variety of potential clients to the government and how they could be impacted by this. So things like GBA plus tend not to be data driven. They're a reflective exercise. So that can help uncover these issues and bring them to the front so we can address them. There's other mechanisms as well. I've spoken about transparency, and part of that is providing meaningful explanation to people that will be impacted by these decisions, so they understand how the decision about them was made. And of course, we try to take every effort to prevent discrimination and prevent poor outcomes from the onset. But it's possible that some will occur. And by providing significant explanation, we let people, in a sense, make an assessment whether that's been the case for them. And if so, be able to contest that. So in the directive, we also have requirements to provide recourse mechanism where people can seek redress. And through regular reviews, so I've mentioned continuous monitoring once the system is launched, but we've also asked departments to look for opportunities to schedule assessments on a regular basis. For example, the algorithmic impact assessment. It's usually done as a test before the system is launched, where we try to anticipate what the negative impacts could be, but it's hard to anticipate everything. So after the system has operated for a while, we ask that people conduct this assessment a second time, and then again on a regular basis. And through this, they can really bring in their newfound understanding of what the actual impacts are, not only the planned impacts, but the actual impacts. And so all of this is really important to address this.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it to the rest of our panelists as well. One of the issues that frequently happens when someone chooses to take an alternative path, they've deemed that the system that is making a decision about them is not going to be fair, does not understand them, and so they have recourse to seek alternative ways of doing it. But frequently, that recourse means that it's not an equivalent service, it's not as convenient, it's not as timely, and as we implement automated decision systems to replace human decisions, there's a skill atrophy. And so even if you ask, well, I don't want to be decided about based upon the data that this AI model has been trained on, it's not including me, it's not going to be equitable to me. But then if that is the case, frequently there isn't really an equivalent service that still exists to be able to give the fair decisions as well, or to have the expertise in the particular complex problem that you're addressing. Does anyone have any thoughts on how we can address that issue?
I mean, I think Jamie was talking about design earlier, and I think, empathetic design is embedded in a lot of what we do and what we build. So I think there are a couple of comments to be made in your question. So I think there's a comment around the pure, the physical device, the way in which we access or share or engage with our information. Jamie talked about that earlier in terms of there's massive inequity in Canada alone, I won't speak to the globe, in hard devices being accessible and usable and inclusive of our population. And we recognize that holistically to a point that we spend an inordinate amount of research dollars on how to get better about hard devices being accessible, inclusive, and usable and affordable for everyone. But that's a difficult topic for us to go into today because it's a wormhole of what devices and how, and what do you choose and how do you choose it. So I'll talk about the data then. So I think, skills have been mentioned a number of times, and I think, from a private sector perspective, being able to share skills and making skills available to people at all levels and all manners, so that we can truly democratize the understanding of what AI is, what models are, and how the data is both taken in and used. I think your specific question around the services not being equal and not necessarily being to the standard that they should be if you opt outside of the path being taken by the algorithm sort of choosing to take you down a certain path. I think that's on us to some degree to be more open around iterative design. And I say that knowing that I come from a place and space where there are less limitations around what that looks like. So solving for a group of people from a private sector's perspective versus a public sector's perspective is different. Those are different conversations. But I think that in the design and the motions, which I think Benoit was talking about, constant feedback loops, constant what we call dog fooding at Google, which is making sure that as we see structures, different entry points of people engaging with our technology and engaging with their data, that we're making sure they end up in the right service, the right space, and the right place. But we can't do that only with ourselves. We look to associations and partnerships with folks here in the room to make sure that we can help bridge those gaps where we have them. So it might be investing in, we have a program called For Your Eyes, and it probably won't surprise you that when it comes to readability and accessibility for folks who are trying to read manuals or trying to understand instructions online, that's very difficult. So we partner with an association. We also have an internal forum called G2G, Googler to Googler, for people that assist in For Your Eyes, so that we can help bring audio to manuals, or bring a discussion point in multiple languages instead of individuals having to read a set of instructions. That's just one example, but this is all crowdsourced. And I think sometimes in our broader society, we're nervous to ask for people to lend skills and assistance, but I think for AI, we're gonna have to trust to some degree the lending of our community skills to create better experiences. Jamie, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that was great. I think the one thing that I would layer on top of the response that you just provided is the value that we would all find in adding equity-centered design to our set of toolkit, to our collective toolkit. I think often it's worth reminding ourselves, why do we work with data? Why do we work in the digital world? For all of us in this room, I think we work in and around the public sector to some extent, or we are public interest technologists. The things that we build, the things that we talk about have an impact on the broader society. And for me, at least, that's the privilege of my life, to get to work in this kind of a space. There is also a responsibility that I think comes with that. And I would really advocate for everybody getting a bit of training in equity-centered design. It's going to teach you to take a bit of a step back and not, go, yes, what Benoit described is critical, having those checks, but are we beyond checking whether or not you're compliant with policies and directives? Are you building the right thing for the right people? So often when we start thinking about a new service, we'll ask ourselves, is it feasible? Like, do we have the technology to do that? And so often today, for AI products that we'd like to build, it's never been cheaper or easier. So is it feasible? Yeah, we can do it. Is it viable? Oh, that's a little bit more complex, right? Can we resource it? Oh, well, do we have the skill sets? It's viable because it's often free, but it's perhaps not viable if we don't have the in-house talent and all that. So that's complex in a different way. And then we'll talk about, is it desirable, right? So is it feasible, viable, and desirable? And that is by far the most complex question when it comes to some of these new ways of building services. I'll give you an example. My team is building a service for a transit authority, and it's a digital product that's going to facilitate transportation. Great. You get to know when your train's coming, when your bus is coming, super helpful. Now, when we think about who are we building this for, well, presumably it's the person who's hopping on and off of the bus. Okay, that was easy. Well, no, let's think about that a little bit more. What about the diverse people who perhaps are traditionally underserved who want to get on or off the bus, right? And so we end up finding that when we define things a little bit more proactively, we can say, okay, 80% of the people are going to be served by an ad minimis version of this application, and the 20%, we'll get to them later. And we actually find that that is the absolute wrong way of doing things. Instead, we start with the 20% who may traditionally be underserved, and we say, what are the needs that those people are going to be bringing into this digital experience? Let's design for them. And guess what? The remaining 80%, they'll benefit also, right? And it's the notion around, like I always give the example around curbs on sidewalks and all that, right? That it used to be like when we were kids, they would just drop off, and now they're all slopes, and that's necessary if you're trying to get around in a wheelchair. It's also really convenient if you're dragging a suitcase around or perhaps a baby carriage, right? And so that's the kind of philosophy that we would advocate for when it comes to building these services. Okay? And then if you take that lens of equity-centered design, we're going to ask you to take a step back even further. And now it's not just your ridership with diverse needs. Perhaps it's the person who's sheltering in the station. Perhaps it's the person who's experiencing homelessness who is now perhaps a user of what you're building. And so I think really situating some of the innovations that we're making in the data and digital space, how they're being enabled by AI, situating all that in a very expansive definition of who is the user base and what is the societal implication of what we're building. I think that's something that collectively it would be really useful if, as a community, we just added that to our tool chest.
Could I add on something to
And
that?
just to add, I think to Jamie's kind of the bus example, because I think that's a great one. What about the drivers who are expected to deliver the services to the groups of people that we might not have considered? And how do we have users, consumers, and customers, and then we have the people who are actually expected to carry out the service. And have we considered the needs, or have we just set a set of expectations? And I think that applies to whether it's models or whether it's getting on a bus. It's who's actually delivering it, how are we holding them accountable, and I think responsibility and accountability are very different things. And so perhaps to a fault, something that I think we do reasonably well and we challenge ourselves around is what are those definitions and what are the working definitions? So within each of your teams, within each of your organizations, how do you define specifically your AI principles and what equity is, what equality is, what fairness models are? And without those definitions, I think it's really hard to have a North Star.
And I think Benoit wants to add something to this.
And Tony as well.
All of us. Yeah, Tony wants to chime in after me. So clearly when all the panelists want to chime in and add on each other, it's a great question. I really like what Jamie said. Are we building the right thing? And that's also part of the approach that we've communicated that we want to have. So as part of our recent guidance on generative AI, we have a set of guiding principles. This is a field that's going to change really fast. So it was important for us to have high-level guiding principles that would remain relevant for a long time, but also that could provide direction facing new situations. And one of these principles, which form the acronym FASTER, the R, the last one, is relevant. And what we want by this is our use of AI should have clear benefits for our clients. It's not about using AI because it's more convenient for the government. It's because it has clear benefits to the clients. And we really stress AI and automation is not appropriate in all cases. So we really need to reflect, why are we looking to automate? And that answer should be centered around the client needs. We've heard a lot too about service design, and often, and it's very important for government to offer services online. Absolutely, and there's a big demand for that. But in doing so, we should not forget our other channels, whether it's telephone, mail, in person, and so on and so forth. I think to your original question, how do we make sure that the people that perhaps fall outside the norm still get good service? That's part of the answer. Is some people don't want that online interaction that's fully automated. So how do we serve them? But by providing that online channel that's automated for the majority of cases, we also provide additional capacity to offer these more personalized interactions. And I think that's part of the answer, is to look for automation where we can. For example, for the positive eligibility, if you are eligible for the service and the system can determine that in an automated fashion, it goes ahead and does that. And then the cases that go to agents are those where the system could not do a positive match. So they look at less cases, they look at the exceptions, but by nature, there's fewer of them. So they can spend more time looking at each case. They can spend more time taking the decision, so that for both the online automated case and the less automated case, we have efficient, we have accurate, we have consistent decisions, and then we can offer consistent service. And let's pass it to Tony, who wanted to also chime in on this.
Well, now that Benoit has said all these things and the others, that my answer will actually be shorter. I'll say that it comes to nothing about them without them. Let's make sure that when we plan something with AI, we take into account that these segments of the population that are minorities, but that also that we take into account that their experience, their aspirations, and that's a question of human rights for all of us. It's a question of full participation to the economy and the society of this country for everyone. And it's very important that we keep that in mind, and that we have good guidelines, good standards, good practices for making sure that we plan, that we test, and that we audit from time to time those automated process, that those either machine learning or artificial intelligence process that we put in place, and we need to experiment with some things that have less consequences than others, so that we learn from these examples, and that we build on them for make sure that we have a more equitable and accessible society and economy.
Yeah, and let's hope that those savings that AI brings will actually be invested in the human capacity to support individuals that choose not to use the AI. I liked the fact that Jamie sort of gave the talk that I usually give in terms of inclusive design. One of the strategies that we frequently use is, we call it the toddler grandparent question. Any of you have toddlers, and what do they ask? The continuous question of why? We tend to apply that to any development or design decision that we're making. I'd like to now turn to questions from the audience. Are there questions?
Thanks. I really enjoyed your presentations. My question is a bit high level, I think, but I heard different perspectives sort of hidden underneath the comments. So you're using the word equity, and much of the commentary was really about the word equality. Mm-hmm. So I want to make the distinction, which I think most people in the room understand. So equality is really the front end. It's about opportunity, accessibility. And I think most people in most circumstances would say that equality is achievable and desirable. But I heard from a few of you saying that equity, which is at the outcomes end, is most of the time achievable and most of the time desirable. Maybe you have different views about that. And the reason I raise this is because I'm not sure personally that I think I want an AI that is about equality. I'm not sure that an AI about equity is always achievable or always desirable. So let me give an example of the drop-down curb. So one of the things we've seen in my city is the drop-down curb also allows something else to happen, and that is distracted walking. So when the drop-down curves became popular 20 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. So now we have cell phones. So the drop-down curves allow something to happen that the curbs didn't allow to happen, which is continual walking while looking at your phone. So the drop-down curbs are part of now an increase in the amount of pedestrian accidents, we think. There's not enough evidence yet to say that this is the case, but there's no doubt that drop-down curbs permit distracted walking in a way that we wouldn't have with step-down curbs. So where I'm going with this is, what do you guys think? Do we want an AI that tries to achieve equal outcomes? And is that always good?
Well, actually, the example of, the equitable thing would be an equal outcome would not mean that there's distracted. There would be some equitable strategy that would address people who are distracted with their self. So, and I'll put the question to the panelists.
Can I try to answer that just for fun?
So I was just trying to figure out, there's a really great picture that I think describes equality and equity really well. But I can't for the life of me figure out who actually did the design themselves. But you might have all seen it, which is the fence. I think it's to watch a baseball game. And it's the, what I'll call cartons or wooden blocks. And so equality being that no matter how tall or short you are, I'm less than 5'4", so I'll be on the shorter side. No matter how tall you are, everyone gets just one wood block. And so there's, me, who still can't see over the fence, and then, Jamie, I don't pretend to know how tall you are, but you've got your wood block, and maybe you can barely see over if you're on your tippy toes, and then whoever the tallest person in this room is has the same wood block, and they can see for days. So that's equality, and then obviously the equity side is like me, the shortest person, gets 3 wood blocks, and now I can see over, and so on and so forth. So I'll share that after today. But I guess my point is, I think I'm gonna talk from a humble opinion of one, not on behalf of the entirety of Google, but I think for me it starts with just the accessibility point. So it's who has it in their respective hands or capabilities, and that includes both the skill base that we've been talking about today, but also just the encouragement of like having more displays of what AI literacy is and having more opportunities to engage in AI literacy just as a baseline, to me, is just a part of our overall education. What people then want to do with that, that'll be taken differently. So I think accessibility is a first piece to me. When I think about equity versus equality, I think that we're all here trying to solve, but you tell me, I think we're trying to solve for equity to start. I don't know what equality will look like, because I don't think we're anywhere close to that. But I think just direct access, direct skills, understanding, sharing of understanding, and then I'll be as bold as to say, like, getting out of our silos and starting to share the information we have. We're kind of our own, both our own advocates and also our own ways of holding ourselves back by not wanting to share our experiences. And I think in tech in particular, you have to share the failures from the learnings. And so this is what we do in encouragement of our work with the public sector, but we know that with that comes great responsibility of what are you sharing, how are you sharing it, and is it a good thing for everyone that you're sharing it about? So that's my running for office answer to your question.
And the third picture that appears, if you search that on which is called Justice, and there the fence is removed, and no one requires the blocks. So, which of course would require quite a change in mindset and a change in general system design. And I understand that Tony has something to add quickly to this. And I'm also conscious that we have 1 minute left. So Tony,
okay. I will say that let's treat people like they want to be treated. That's important. I will also say that it's an important thing to think of inclusion from the start of all these things, and that will also bring equity, and that will ensure that we maximize the results for everyone. The full potential of everyone can be reached and can be included into a better society, a more productive economy. Thank you.
And do we have further questions from the audience?
Hey, hello. Hi, Jamie. Maybe pull it away from me a little bit. Yeah, John Jordan. I'm from the province of British Columbia. I'm going to put Google on the spot a little bit here. Sorry about that. So I'm a quadriplegic, so I use voice control. This isn't an AI question. I use voice control, and I'm able to do quite a bit. However, there are a number of apps, Google, Apple, and whatnot, that don't work perfectly. In fact, very simple functions like the reply to function in Gmail doesn't have a voice control number on it. And, you know, I appreciate all of the, you know, like the intention, but it seems to me for 5 minutes, $100 billion profitable company could maybe do a little testing with their apps. I mean, you know, AI is fancy and all that, but just some basic stuff would be great. I don't know, there's probably more than me out there using voice control, and I have to say, like, I appreciate all the work that technology does for me, and I'm 30 years experience in software development before this little incident happened. But is there a way, and then I tried to, and this was Apple, I tried to ask Apple's head of accessibility to see if we could do something via LinkedIn, and the answer was, yeah, just send your problems to, you know, accessibility@apple.com. And actually that's very hard to do by voice control. It's not really feasible. So I just wonder if there's things that, you know, companies could do to, you know, partner with people or just do a little bit of upfront testing, I guess. So I know that's not you personally, but you're here talking about Google.
Absolutely. So thank you for the comments, and I think it takes a lot to just share, like, this is my feeling and what can you do about it. So I guess I have a couple of things I would share. There's an imperfection to how we build. I think that we recognize that, and I talked about learnings from failures. It probably won't surprise any of you if you're able to read the news on a regular basis that you know, we are, as a company, as an industry, held to a very high standard of expectations of user groups, and I talked about dog fooding earlier, and we're imperfect at that, and I think that we're quite open about that. Ways that we've started to, and Sundar's sort of spoken about more recently, we have a team called the Pear Team, not the fruit, but like being in a duo, and that is the People for AI Responsibility team that's multidisciplinary. We're investing a lot of money in research to do, I think, one of the things you asked, which is, why can't you do more user group focused building? And if you are building empathetically, which our empathetic design model is a huge focus on feeling the user, consumer, and customer's pain, living in it, really appreciating what it means for them in order to then start to look at what any potential solutions could be. So I think a takeaway for me from your comments is I work with the workspace team very closely, and absolutely we should have a feature that has voice enabled. I'm surprised and thinking in my head of what we have internally and maybe haven't taken to market, because I do think there are aspects that maybe just aren't public yet. I think there's another element which we haven't really talked about today, which is the commercialization of access. So there are free models, there are freemium models, There are pay-for models, and often built off of the same structure. But there's definitely a financial barrier for a lot to access what I'll call the supreme model, whether it's Workspace or Apple, which I can't speak to officially, but am a user of Apple myself. So in our society, we are struggling to remove that financial barrier, and I think that it's up to both public and private sector to think about equity and accessibility in helping remove some of those financial barriers. So I can't tell you how Google needs to change today, because there are probably lots of things that we need to look at differently. But I can tell you that from our commercial arms, we are trying to invest in alphabet companies and things that will go to democratize, to scale what normally would be, I'll call it pay-for access. So thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry that I don't have the most definitive answer, but happy to talk afterwards and maybe connect with the PAIR team.
Yeah, and here we're talking about a fairly wicked problem where the system is broken. One of the issues with assistive technology, government is at fault, private sector is at fault, and even the assistive technology industry to some extent is at fault. What we have is a system that provides a segregated access to what Jamie was talking about, to the general digital access. Government programs that fund the necessary alternative systems require that they only fund specialized technologies made by small, medium enterprise companies that don't have the wherewithal to keep interoperable with the likes of Google or Apple or any of the larger companies that we're talking about. And so we have Moore's Law for the rest of society, but if you require something that is alternative, then it's the opposite. Things are getting more expensive because there are no economies of scale, and creating the assistive technology, they disappear. And the functions, because as the technologies that Google or Apple are creating get updated faster and faster and faster, the assistive special technologies cannot keep up. And so I think we need a complete rethinking of how do we provide that digital access? Why is it not the responsibility of Google and Apple to ensure that the technology works for everyone, especially those individuals that are probably going to come up with the greatest innovation and probably understand the ways in which the technology can go wrong the best. So I think perhaps what Benoit was talking about, releasing the human capacity to address the individuals that whose needs have not been addressed, might be a really great thing to do with AI. But I wonder if others within the group have anything to contribute to this question. And thank you for that question. Okay. I think this is maybe a bigger problem than can be resolved here within the panel. Are there other questions from the audience? Okay, then I'd like to turn it to our panel for some closing remarks and closing reflections. And Tony, since we haven't heard as much from you, perhaps you can start.
Thank you very much. Maybe a few things also about the importance of ethics in all this, and keeping in mind that we need consultation mechanisms for ethics. We need to have also those guidelines that we were talking about, and this is a problem where AI is evolving so fast. We have to actually have very agile mechanisms and keep the conversation going among all the players in society, public, private, academics, nonprofit, etc. I mean, this is essential for success, and it's also at the international level that we have to do this. So it's an interesting challenge that we have to do horizontally. It's like climate change. It's not going to go away. It's something we will need to keep talking about, the ethics and the equity and the inclusion of everyone, and to see a future of AI that will be accessible. Personally, as for myself, as a person with disability, I see that AI can significantly improve processes in some ways that are less critical, let's say, where I'm getting very careful is when AI has the potential to make some choices about people where people would not necessarily be well represented, or not necessarily been included in the assumptions for those choices. And that's where I think ethics in terms of necessity and proportionality also of the data used, or the data that we seek, is also very important. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm also on LinkedIn if some people want to connect with me and learn further about what we do at StatsCan and what I do personally. I'm always happy to discuss. Thanks.
And hopefully our ethics will go right to the edge as well as we consider ethics. Benoit, do you have some parting things you'd like to say?
I'll share one last thought, which is the aspect on how we develop policies for this. And by extension, I think also how we design and build services. And the point is, it should be an open process. We should, speaking for government, share our analysis, share the rationales for why we're going certain direction, and be willing to listen to input. And for that, we should also engage with a variety of experts to go seek that input and look for diversity in backgrounds and the people we ask for this input. They should include the computer science, of course, but also those that are thinking about the philosophy, the ethics, and other domains. And we want these experts to also represent the diversity of people. So it's a little bit of a call to action, but asking that we build policies, that we build systems, that we build services in an open fashion, and where there's possibilities for public input in this.
And of course, the expertise of lived experience as well, those individuals most impacted by these systems. Thank you. And I'll turn it to Jamie.
Sure. Start playing with these tools. It's somewhat important that everybody in this room know a little bit about how AI is evolving, and not just in theory. Yeah, read the Directive on Automated Decision Making, absolutely. Get yourself skilled up on equity center design. I can send you an article. It's gonna do that for sure. But most importantly, start playing with the tools. And it's okay if it's just hey, ChatGPT, here's a picture of my fridge, what can I make as a tasty meal? But get going, right? For me, I think it's a service imperative. If I'm not integrating some of the efficiencies that come with AI into the way that I serve my clients, I'm not serving them as well as I can. And that means that they are not passing on those savings to the taxpayer. And we are not supporting collective prosperity as well as we can. And I know that's a bit of a logical leap, but still, I would suggest that given the pace of change and given what becomes possible with these new tools, yes, do it responsibly, absolutely, but most importantly, do it. Right? These are breathtaking tools, and I would really like people who are thoughtful, who show up at a thing like the Canadian Open Data Summit, who care about transparency, who care about using data and digital to build stronger communities. I want us to be shaping this conversation in Canada. And so that would be my, for sure, read all those things we talked about, but start by playing with the tools.
And there are free courses. Google has free courses, Microsoft has free courses. The courses are built in collaboration with some of you here in this room and other experts. So there's no real excuse, and they're free monetarily. They're free in terms of low bandwidth access. We've tried to make them as accessible as possible. If you don't have accessibility to them, or you know a group or an individual doesn't, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find. I will get you that access. I think plus one to what Jamie said, you have to get in the sandbox. This is not demystifying AI. This is not like a unicorn. We don't know what it looks like. We're democratizing it now. Like, the train has left the station. So you kind of get in there and you start to make it real for yourself as a user and consumer. And then as a result, you'll bring that into whatever experience that you are going to help shape the future of this country, this province, etc. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the dialogue.
Great. Can I ask one last question, given those two responses? Do you think that AI in the near future will go beyond majority rules, statistical significance, statistical reasoning towards exploratory systems where diversity is increased? So inverting the formula that are used to do the probabilistic prediction and to make decisions and to determine what is going to be the response that a large language model gives. And you can say yes or no.
Yes. I'm not going to put a number on that. I'm not going to say the number of years, because the one thing that really makes you look silly is when, you know, you predict 20 years and then it happens 6 months later. So yes, it's going to happen. I don't know when.
Okay.
Plus one.
Okay, wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for attending to this particular topic and for the questions that you've responded. And I'm sure certainly the individuals that are here, Jamie and Andy, will be happy to answer further questions.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating discussion. For those of you that don't know, Yuta is working with WeCount, and I've taken their equity and data training. It's actually a fantastic course. I'll never forget, I took the training in March, and the first comment made by the instructor was, if I was a racist, I'd want to work in data, which I thought was fascinating, and it's a way to capture you and bring you in, because then talks about how the people who work in data shape how we perceive information, how we absorb information. And that's a really big thing around equity in data. This conversation was so layered from an accessibility perspective, equity, equality, and all those things layer into a larger framework. And I think we're still evolving and developing in that. And I think it's gonna take some time, but at least we're thinking about it, and that's the first step. So that being said, thank you very much. That was an amazing discussion. We are now at lunch. We're gonna take about 45 minutes for lunch. Enjoy your lunch. During lunch, Eugene is going to be stepping up and basically getting your feedback through a survey as to how the Open Data Summit, or how you're experiencing the Open Data Summit. So looking forward to hearing from you and hearing what your thoughts are on what we've done well, what we could do better moving forward. So please feel free to stand up, grab some food, and enjoy your lunch.